Note to self. Never talk about a FromSoft game again without doing market research. Sarcasm plus inexperience equals bad time. Well, I guess that's just a bad pairing in any circumstance. You know what else is a bad pairing? Wait, it's this video. Fuck. The Coffin of Andy and Leyley, or Decay, however you pronounce that acronym, is certainly one of the most video games of all time. And I know that phrase is normally used to demean the subject of the matter, but I use it in a more favorable context here. Is that okay to say? I feel like any positive commentary I aim towards this game is somehow going to boomerang itself back into my face with a little note attached calling me a dirty inbred. You know what? I'm pinning that. Let's first talk about what this is for a second. The Coffin of Andy and Leyley, which I will stand my ground and say that's how it's pronounced because it makes a certain phrase sound more catchy, reeks of early YouTube. And by that, I mean RPG Maker. Never thought I'd ever talk about that in my life, ever. Anyone here remember the Crooked Man? Man, that freaked me out as a kid. Looking back, I have no idea why. Wow, I cannot keep on topic. Maybe I'm just trying to buy time for myself. Okay, I'll do a better job from now on, and unlike a certain someone, those words actually mean something. As I was saying, this is an RPG Maker style game, which means a lot of moving around and fetch quest style gameplay to move the plot along. The tagline on Steam is cannibalism and codependency, and if that doesn't give you an inkling as to the vibe they're going for, no worries, that's why I'm here. It's hard enough to plaster an all-encompassing label onto this game without sounding like a pretentious asshole, and have a hard enough time with that as it is, but if you had a gun to my head, I'd call it a psycho-thriller comedy visual novel with courtesy puzzles to engage the brain. Our protagonists are blood-related. Siblings in their 20s who, following a major corporate fuck-up from a water company, have been put into quarantine out of fear of, Las Plagas. Now, this doesn't sound too bad, especially for the introverted sort, which you're statistically more likely to be if you've clicked on this video. It's proven, don't test me on it, but when you throw in a complete lack of food for months on end, then the issues start to present themselves. Suddenly, our intrepid, blood-related duo might have to resort to one thing or the other just to survive. And no, it's not what you think. Or maybe it's exactly what you think. What are you thinking about? Now, this premise is all well and good, but that's not where the meat of this game lies. What sets the Coffin of Andy and Leyley apart from your bog-standard shock and horror walk-and-click adventure is the intricate and complicated dynamic between Andrew and Ashley Graves, or Andy and Leyley, depending on which one you talk to and at what time of the day. It's a dynamic that's earned dismissal and ire alike, a dynamic that many find comforting and charming and cute, but one I, and perhaps many others, find disturbingly tragic, perhaps due to the fact that I myself, much like Andrew, am an older sibling. Is it fair to say that this is the most controversial RPG Maker horror game of all time? No, not even close. But I dare you to come up with a more intriguing title. The amount of these that exist are so plentiful, there's definitely one bereft of any shed of humanity somewhere out there that would make even this game blush in embarrassment. But it's still drummed up its fair share of unruly critiques and comments because of its theming, and I hope not to do it that disservice with this video. This is the story of the Coffin of Andy and Leyley. Or at least so far, the game's still in early access. I just wanted to work on this script because I actually go to sleep wondering how I can put this all into words. Despite what the last line of the script entails, I'm not actually going to sit here and narrate the entire game's events to you excruciatingly small bit by excruciatingly small bit. Do I look or sound like Pack to you? There are enough playthroughs of this game to stock a library shelf A through Z, maybe A through J. Point is, if you'd like story time, go visit your local VTuber. They've probably got one of those Let's Plays lying about somewhere. I'll also try to talk about character-based interactions that have me thinking about these characters' relationships, and I'll try to give some context for it to make sense. But I'll first touch on something that's completely different, which is the art. Instantly, what sets this game apart from many other RPG Maker horror games is the art. Whereas many other games who tread on the same grounds opt for something more gritty, messy, or abstract, this game's art is extremely clean, showcased mostly in the portraits and CGs. Thick lines, no shading, eyes being the only colorful part of any character's design, even proportions, everything about the characters is just visually appealing. Visible bra straps and old boy riz will do it, I suppose. Say whatever you want about the finer societal implications of designing hot, mentally unstable characters, but it's whatever for me. On the other hand, the overworld is simplified and childlike, which may be representative of how a certain character sees the outside world as a whole. It's presented as little paper cutouts dancing along a drawn background, and serves as a very nice backdrop to contrast what many would consider the more important part of the game. That important part lies in the characters. Episode 1 has us only play as Ashley without any room for her brother Andrew's perspective, which makes me question the original scope of the game because compared to Episode 2, everything here is quite narrow. Nevertheless, it lets me focus on what I need to without extra noise. Ashley and Andrew are stuck in their apartment for drinking the no-no water that totally has the real no-no bugs in it and is not at all a poorly disguised organ harvesting scheme conducted by a capitalist surgeon CEO who just so happens to own the water company supplying said water to the entire building. With that out of the way, I think it's about time I finally talk characters. From the get-go, we understand that Ashley, she's the pink one, is an unserious person by nature. Her internal monologue reveals she rarely responds to any situation with any amount of before-thought or with a straight face, as evidenced by the multiple exclamation marks every other sentence and the constant sarcastic commentary. Wait, she's kinda like me, isn't she? Fuck. Now, this by itself wouldn't be too bad, but when combined with her other character quirks, she ends up being a Powerpuff Girl without the sugar or spice. Or anything nice at all, in fact, nothing nice at all. Andrew, the green one, on the other hand, we learn to be the cooler, calmer, and more collected of the siblings, as the older one normally is. He's also a massive pushover because it took all but 2 lines of dialogue for him to cave and eat the last bit of food he specifically hid from Ashley because it was their last bit of food. While constantly at odds with his sister for her brash and laid-back demeanor, especially considering their situation, he at heart finds her more harmless antics endearing and definitely cares for her well-being. I mean, what other kind of brother carries his unconscious sister to the couch and plays with her hair while waiting for her to wake up from a malnutrition-powered cleaning spree? I don't think that had the effect I was intending for. The music surrounding the character antics is quite fitting too. With the common use of household sounds accentuating their housebound problems, it's sufficiently gloomy with a very light touch of goofiness, which is very well in line with the game as a whole. Except for that one "You Should Panic Now" track that plays during intense moments that just shits a jazz piano lick down your throat. Like, damn, I thought I was supposed to be running for my life, not snapping my fingers in a dark corner of a bar. A distinction the game tries to make clear from the very start is the line drawn between Andy and Andrew and Leyley and Ashley, made clear through this flashback. And honestly, a lot of the contention stems from how you draw that line and how you interpret it, which becomes a recurring pattern as to how the game eventually plays out. At least here, we're shown briefly that Leyley is trying to make Andy do something he's not entirely gung-ho about. And this does repeat itself quite a bit in episode 1, where Ashley pushes the two into uncomfortable situations like eating their last can of food, checking on their weird Satanist neighbor, and coming to a decision on whether or not to eat him. Cannibalism. I think we're far enough into the video where I can say that without fear of being neutered. It's always Ashley leading the charge. She likes to do things, many things that other people may not consider normal. She innately seems very curious, impulsive, and playful, almost like a child in that sense. They say children represent the worst of us because they have all the wants and emotions that adults have, but none of the life experience to build defenses that separate good and bad. Ashley got that life experience, at least in the form of years, but those walls for her don't really exist. She gets what people consider good and bad, but she also doesn't really care. You'll have noticed I'm holding off on using psychological terms because, well, what the fuck do I know? For me to assign such sensitive medical terms to these fictional yet very ill characters is too much gamer chair doctor than I can handle. And this isn't a disparaging comment towards people who do, it's just not something I myself am comfortable with. I speak with too much ignorance. But if I'm allowed to shoot my shot, I'd say she gives Homelander if Homelander was a 20-something-year-old goth girl. And while Ashley might not seem to care about many things, one thing she does care about is her brother Andrew. It's perhaps the only thing she cares about. It would have been easy for her to have the tomatoes herself. She never knew it was Andrew who hid them, but she shared them anyway. She cares enough about him to share their dark, intrusive thoughts on the floor together. Her teasing might be rampant and out of pocket and quite honestly very tiring, but she does it because it's Andrew, and Andrew always reacts like Andrew, which she finds very funny. Younger siblings, eh? That care isn't one-sided either. Just as Ashley could have had the tomatoes herself, Andrew kept it for both of their sakes, fully intent on sharing it when the situation was much more dire. He cares enough to ask her not to overexert herself when doing something pointless like cleaning, and when he believes he messed up their one chance at food, he takes a step back and softly asks his sister if he messed things up for them. He doesn't want to be the reason they end up dead, but it's clear that he's aware that his sister isn't exactly put together, having to remind her not to jump balcony to balcony 4 stories up like that's just a regular thought going through regular people's brains. Andrew also accompanies Ashley despite knowing she's up to trouble under the pretense of worrying for her, hinting at part of his responsible side. That'll be ironic for later. They watch as their Satanist neighbor summons a demon and goes through the worst nightmare of any person encountering a wish-granting entity, i.e. poor wording.
Prank him, John. You already know.
Freeing himself from their hellish predicament by getting his soul snatched. After the neighbor gets Iron Reaver soul stealing right in front of their eyes, the siblings break in and Ashley denotes, "That's a lot of meat." From just the way she reacts afterward, I'm inclined to believe that it was just an observation because her mind just works that plainly and spits out whatever it sees and how things are with no thought to it. But Andrew believes she was insinuating eating the body. Perhaps unsurprisingly, she offers no resistance to the idea. Another part of Ashley's character is that she's always trying to center Andrew when he begins to spiral in his apparently common routine of flip-flopping in the wind of decision. Maybe this is somewhat reminiscent to you all. This is first shown when she attempts to justify cannibalism pointedly for Andrew's sake and not for hers because, as we'll find out time and time again, she really doesn't care. But Andrew relents and tells Ashley to get some bags while he chops the body for transport. You can actually stay and watch Andrew do his part, where you'll find that Ashley's unrestricted and childish indifference in the face of any and all situations is something that pulls Andrew out of his supposed spiral, whereas it got on his nerves prior. Whereas before, he was mumbling to himself, breaking down, lashing out at his sister for letting it slip Andy instead of Andrew, he suddenly bursts out laughing when Ashley makes an inappropriate joke, seemingly helping him disassociate a little. Something that's actually happened once before and will happen time and time again, hinting that Andrew might not be as completely reasonable as he seems. These little character moments are designated with a little star and are actually pretty easy to miss if you just go objective by objective, so it's best to sporadically go around interacting with anything that even looks like it's outlined from the background for the best results. This behavioral tic in particular is most likely something Andrew developed as he got older, as the flashback from the very start is fully shown not too long after they cook and eat part of their neighbor. In this flashback, Leyley seems to make statements just as unfiltered and outrageous as the ones she does in the future. The difference being that here, Andy doesn't really know how to react, being a kid. While there's a lot here I'll probably talk about at another point, one such statement I'll draw attention to is how she likens her brother to being a bitch in a box, describing him like a toy to be played with at her discretion and having sole ownership of his time and being. One thing that this game tries really hard to make clear is that Ashley isn't okay. That alone coming out of a child's mouth is terrifying, but when you contextualize it with situations in the future, yeah, it's starting to earn that psychological horror tag. From an early age, Leyley's obsession with her brother is as obvious as it is unhealthy. Just the fact that a classmate admits to having a crush on Andy is enough to get her to stake her claim on him. Not in a cute, adorable way, but rather how a thriller movie would depict an abusive husband sort of way. How dare she steal from another woman sort of way. You like my brother, so I'm gonna stuff you in a box in an abandoned warehouse sort of way. And the siblings end up doing just that, following Leyley's constant and incessant hounding. As the girl with asthma, because yes, of course she has asthma, is currently being attacked by her asthma in a dark, dusty box, Leyley is continuing to berate her brother for not wanting to lock the girl inside. She's obsessed over what he thinks about her, whether she's pretty or more deserving of her time, or whether or not Andy thinks this girl is in any way better than she is. All the while, Andy's doing his best to try tend to his sister's needs while also trying to free this poor girl. This reluctance reveals that Ashley is at least somewhat self-aware. She knows that she isn't what most people consider normal, and it's the reason why nobody likes her, to which her brother responds by saying he likes her. But that's not enough for her. Andy feels as though no matter what he does, it's never enough for her. It's only when Leyley begins to break down in tears that Andy's choice between doing what's right and doing right by his sister becomes clear. Andy chooses his sister. We're just gonna operate under the assumption that these kids could not see how one thing would lead to another, would lead to a very obvious outcome. As a kid, you'd believe dust was harmless and asthma wasn't real, and many other such irrefutably true facts. Would that excuse their actions in a court of law? I don't know the specifics, but I'm pretty sure a jury would still go, oh, that's effed. because that's exactly how I reacted. The dream is interrupted by a panic-induced Andrew who is still hung up over eating a man, as many people would be. His first course of action isn't to hold himself up or bottle the emotion, it's to come to Ashley with it, who then does what she can to comfort him by showering him with her sweet honeyed love as they share a bed. This would be so very sweet if they weren't blood-related and in their 20s. If I had to mention this every time I thought it, we'd be here another 10 minutes. But hey, we'll just push that aside, and the very next day, Andrew plans to use the demon to help them out of their predicament, though the daily checks by the wardens prove to be an immediate obstacle because of all the blood that is currently splattered everywhere. Ashley's forced into hiding after cleaning the blood up. You can actually die here, which I did, which is bloody idiotic considering the door is 3 feet away from the wardrobe, only to be caught by what is probably the most thorough guard I've ever seen in a video game, leading Andrew to save her by swiftly slicing the warden with a nearby cleaver. And instead of freaking out or dropping the cleaver in horror like you'd imagine him to based on his behavior the day before, Andrew sighs, extends a bloody hand to his sister, and asks for Leyley to come and play. What? What is wrong with you?
You were the chosen one.
Yeah, apparently, Andrew isn't the sane one. He's just the saner one. Nuance to come will be put aside for later. The only saving grace for my perception of his mental health is the understanding that he'll have a panic attack about this later, but it doesn't change the fact that he killed a man with his own 2 hands and didn't bat an eye. Perhaps because it was to save Ashley. I'll be skipping a couple scenes because the ideas they convey get reinforced later on, or they just aren't really important to the conversation I want to be having. But here are some things that happen that you might want to keep in mind. Some violent coercion later, the juicy part of episode 1 follows the death of the second warden and yet another neighbor, the latter dying at the hands of Andrew while Ashley was away dealing with the warden. An argument springs between the two, seemingly out of nowhere, with Ashley accusing Andrew of attempting to bang the hot neighbor lady when she wasn't looking, which is the reason why he had to ultimately kill her because she tried to escape when Andrew gave her some space. Because this is Ashley, who was shown to be so obsessed with her brother's perception of other women and herself in comparison. Because this is Ashley, who is similarly obsessed with how he spends his time. Because this is Ashley, the very same one who stalked and harassed her brother's suicidally depressed girlfriend to the point where she broke up with him out of fear of her life. It's because this is Ashley that this argument takes place here of all places, and now even given the situation. I don't need to list the boxes that Ashley's ticking here. She pulls the "oh, I'll just kill myself" then card out of the deck like it's fucking Dark Magician and she's behind on life points. At this point, even Andrew catches on to this being a regular outburst on her part and it being some kind of ploy to rile him up and get him wrapped around her finger again. Entitled to Andrew's time as if it were a right is what it seems. If you gave the phrase gaslight gatekeep girl boss a kilogram of meth, you'd probably have half the aura Ashley possesses in this argument. It's emphasized again and again. Focus on me. Your priority is me. I'm the only thing that should matter to you. She tells Andrew that she's never made him do anything despite manipulating his emotions at each and every turn, something she's at least aware of when they're older. She acts the victim and says she doesn't spend any time with her anymore when they've spent 3 months together in quarantine. She tells him he doesn't even treat her like a friend when they've actually been getting along quite fine, all things considered. And when Andrew tries to be the bigger man and sweep this all under their rug to their mutual benefit or not, she presses on to accentuate her own innocence and proclaim Andrew as the worst of them in a childish attempt to deflect blame and say it's on that grounds that he cannot judge her. She didn't kill anyone, she didn't suggest eating that cultist, and if Andrew really was the stand-up guy he's trying to make himself look, why the hell did he stop Ashley from locking that girl up in that box? Holy shit, she's off her rocker. It's important to note here that Ashley is crying, but it's not because of what they've done or what they did to that girl. I think she's crying because it feels to her as if Andrew is truly starting to lose faith in her and hate her for what she is. Hate her for what she knows she is. When they were kids, Andy told her that he liked her no matter what, that even despite her strange disposition, he still preferred her to this random girl he had never met. And that probably cemented to a young Leyley that her brother was the only one who could ever truly see her, that he was her one and only true friend, that in this world it was only her and Andy on this lonely island she had always found herself on. And for that same Andy to think about jumping ship and leaving her all alone for some unworthy harlot is an absolutely terrifying thought. That terror manifests itself into rage as she begins to assault her brother, a fight that Andrew easily turns the tides to, and the intensity of the day's events combined with a heated argument gives way to the thought of genuinely killing Ashley here and now. His panic attacks, his nightmares, his relationships with others going into flames, all of it points to Ashley, at least in his eyes. She is the source of all of his problems, and yet for some strange reason, she's also the solution. Her presence helps him disassociate. Her bubbly nature pulls him out of his deep intrusive thoughts like the night they ate their neighbor. She is the despair, and the sweet relief. It's almost like I'm describing a drug. Andrew could just kill her in the heat of the moment, but who knows what might end up happening to him down the road, because no amount of sleeping pills can substitute the genuine emotion he feels when simply talking and arguing with his sister. But Andrew does what he's always done, and he relents. Just as he relented when they were kids, just as he relents in their everyday life, Andrew chooses his sister. When Ashley promises to behave as long as it's just them, he believes her. And despite how much he hates Andy for having no backbone and Leyley for her overbearing personality, it could be said that this is proof that neither of them have really grown up. With how this universe seems to be a satire of the actual world and so many things being portrayed in a silly and unrealistic way, the one thing that actually gets some serious focus is how utterly screwed up these two are. And to me, it's invitingly tragic. We're shown the absolute desperation of Ashley and the concealed malice of Andrew, and their undeniable need for one another to feel like everything will be alright. And oh boy, we're just getting started. This is all to set the stage for episode 2. How long is this video? Like 20 minutes already? Ugh. There's nothing left in their way. So with a slew of bodies in their wake and an appendage or two in their stomach, they skip town to go off on yet another one of their adventures as Andy and Leyley. So far, all I've really done is outline Andrew and Ashley's dynamic and delve a little deeper into their symbiosis, as well as what their childhood trauma means to the two of them. I managed to talk a little bit more about how Ashley sees herself and how she sees her relationship with Andrew simply because hers is the only perspective we get. Ashley knows what she is and she hates herself for it. Feels as though Andrew is the only one who can love her despite all of her flaws, so she does whatever it takes to make sure he stays by her side. In episode 2, we finally get to see things from the eyes of our favorite trauma-riddled older brother, so I get to talk a little bit more about how I perceive him. And if you've been catching on to how I've been describing him thus far, stick around please, it's not what you think. Episode 2 also introduces an integral character, that being Mrs. Renee Graves. That appears to be her official name. I must have missed it in a devlog somewhere, but we'll roll with it. Mrs. Graves is perhaps contending for the award of Worst Mother of All Time, and believe you me, I am aware how heavy the competition is. I'd argue it's perhaps not imprudent to believe that she is the entire reason we see Andrew and Ashley as they are today. I'll scrub through my footage to find the exact line, but the game tells us that Renee had Andrew when she was only 15 and Ashley 2 years later when she was 17. The first child, definitely a mistake, but if she did her best, it wasn't as though she couldn't do right by Andrew as he grew up. The second child, I feel, was on purpose, a decision born of extremely poor judgment, and I can only really attribute one reason as to why on God's green earth it's one she made, and I'll circle back onto that later. It's actually quite clear that out of her 2 children, she heavily favors Andrew over his sister, for one simple fact, that he was an easy child, implying that his nature wasn't only taken advantage of by his sister, but also by his own mother. This guy cannot get a break. Mrs. Graves found it quite helpful that her firstborn was so easy to direct and manipulate. She liked Andrew for the sheer fact that she didn't have to do much in the parenting department when it came to him. Give him some cash and a lollipop and tell him to fuck off for the day so she could do whatever the hell else was more important than raising her own child. But Ashley... oh, she was a problem. Ashley was loud, needy, strange, uncontrollable, and for a woman like Mrs. Graves, that was the metal bar on the kitty cat's back, because Mrs. Graves loves being in control. She has a need to influence and have power over her surroundings, as proved by her screaming orders at her fully grown children at a pin drop, and her own sexual taste involving tying her husband up like a Sunday hog ready to be roasted. So for her own daughter to be something she felt as though she had no ability to control, she probably despised her for it. Ashley was more than just a problem child to Miss Graves. She was a deeply rooted regret that she would have a way with in an instant if it didn't draw the eyes of the public. But if she could, hell, under the right circumstances, people might see her as the victim, even. Because what would everyone think if Miss Strong Teenage Mom's daughter suddenly went missing after one of her outbursts? I think her hatred of Ashley is ironic then, because you can draw many parallels to their behavior, especially in their tendency to manipulate people. In Ashley's case, being solely Andrew. If there's anything that Mrs. Graves loves as much as control, it's how other people perceive her. She makes an effort to get along with her suburban neighbors at cookouts despite Andrew jabbing that she would stick out like a sore thumb, perhaps due to knowing how rough her edges are, putting it all lightly. There's a depiction in one of the roots, yes there are roots, we'll get to it, that show her holding a baby Ashley with a halo around her, seemingly in anguish. As I've said, she had Andrew at 15, making her a teenage mom. You very commonly hear things about teenage mothers being reckless and stupid, but you can also hear things in stark contrast. Things like praise for raising a baby at such a young age, praise for bravery, resilience and willingness to take responsibility for your own actions. I think Renee got the latter end of that stick, receiving the adoration and praise without experiencing much of the hardship that came with being a parent, because Andrew as a baby was just so easy to take care of. And wanting to hold on to that moniker that people had given her, she ended up with a second child, Ashley, who was much more than she could have ever expected. Now Mrs. Graves was stuck with 2 children at a very inexperienced age and would be too busy and completely lost as to how to go about that, because there's no way in hell that Mr. Graves was going to be of any help. You could sneeze funny and blow that guy over a border somewhere. I will not be talking about Mr. Graves. The story believes he has no agency in his own life, so he will have no agency here. And I know this will ruffle the jimmies of at least 2 people watching this. Sorry. Being completely unable to handle her own daughter, Mrs. Graves gave that responsibility to her firstborn child, as any self-respecting mother would. If Andrew could rein in Ashley just a little bit, they may be able to retain the image of a happy family, the image that she seems so hell-bent on keeping. And to Andrew, well, mother knows best, right? Isn't an older brother supposed to take care of their younger sister? I think this is demonstrated most clearly in one of Ashley's key memories, played out by reaching the secret present in the first dream sequence following the killing of a hitman sent after them. We'll gloss over that bit, not important. You see how we're at a point where that's just the case? This memory takes place before the box incident and on Leyley's birthday. The only one who appears to remember or even give a shit is Andy, and it's shown to us nobody ever wants to play with Leyley, perhaps due to her naturally obnoxious demeanor. They go out to buy a 12-pack of muffins to celebrate with a small amount of pocket money that Andy has. They lather them in whipped cream, put on a shitty R-18 action flick, and call it a day. In its entirety, this memory is actually quite tame, but if you look at the little things, you start to see the beginning of Ashley's behavioral patterns. We can maybe chalk it up to her being in a mood because nobody cared about her birthday, but she seems quite mellow here. Leyley almost appears like an average child. When Andy asks why she likes hypergore splatterbrains too, she admits it's only because people say she shouldn't watch it, as if liking it is a pure act of rebellion. If people don't care about her, why should she offer the same courtesy to their thoughts and beliefs? It's only at the very end where Leyley says something off color. Her birthday wish is that Andy loses all of his friends and never finds love. Remember in the episode 1 discussion where I talked about how Ashley starts to believe Andrew is the only one who could ever truly love her, and that being showcased in how he eventually chose his sister in the box incident? I think I can shift that all over here now, because it's shown that lemon muffins are a key imagery in Ashley's own mind, as depicted in this drawing, representing Andrew's unconditional love for her. The unconditional aspect enforced by the idea Andy says he'll get them for her every year without fail, even going so far as to bake them himself if the supermarket ever stops selling them. Perhaps for the first time in her life, Ashley felt as though someone cared, a tight hug showing that she would never want to let go of that feeling. In childhood, or in their adult years, she'd want Andy to give her that affection for as long as she lived, because he was the only one who could. But while Leyley was drowning in what she perceived as his love, Andy could only return the hug with a lost and solemn gaze. That look, to me, is as important as Ashley's tears in episode 1. There are probably a few ways you can take this, like pity for his sister and that nobody seems to care, sadness that she is the way she is, or maybe it's realization for Andy that he's the only one who can make a difference. The responsibility pushed onto his shoulders by his mother is enacted here, and will continue to be enacted again and again, because it is Andrew's duty to hold on to her and choose his sister when no one else will. Welcome to my little Andy rant corner. This can only go well. If you've been paying any attention to the video thus far, you'll have probably noticed the tone I've taken to Andrew in comparison to Ashley. I've been framing Andrew in a much more sympathetic light than his sister, and that's not to say that you can't make the case for Ashley too. In my own eyes, the only reason we get to see any of these absolute nutcases as they are is because of their mother. And don't get me wrong, I'm not about to climb a hill, take 3 arrows to my chest, rip off my shirt only to reveal the words "Andrew did nothing wrong" tatted on my back as I scream to the high heavens and bleed out to death. That's not what I'm trying to do. Let's just say it for how it is. The person who Andrew is now is an incorrigible, cold-blooded murderer whose repressed obsession for his own sister is equally the reason for the troughs in his life as much as the sister herself. His complete unwillingness to accept the consequences for any actions he takes, enables, or ignores, a trait also present in his mother and instilled in him by this moment we might talk about later, cements him as a complete asshole douchebag. And many people latch onto that part of him and the fact that he knows how to mask his tendencies better to imply that he should know better and simply see that as that. Perhaps because this game portrays Ashley as so irredeemably insane, then surely on a subtextual level that means Andrew is too. And again, not saying that isn't the case, but someone's got to stand up for my man. Big brother's got to unite. Because whenever I get a glimpse of their past, I can't help but shake this perception of Andy. The perception that all he wanted was the best for his sister, and how that cost him everything. I feel like I'm more lenient on Andrew because I see an Andy without a Leyley having a non-zero chance of being able to live somewhat normally. I mean, he might just end up as Patrick Bateman, but a Leyley without an Andy would have grown up without anyone at all to offer her what she needed. We're shown that Andy is sociable enough to have friends who come on his birthdays, that he's smart, not smart enough to know what asthma is, but has admirers and seemed much more the normal child than Ashley ever was. We're also shown that he has something of a moral standing. He was never really on board with locking Nina in that box. Yes, that's her name. Yes, Andrew remembers it because it traumatized him so much when Ashley just forgot it with a wave of her magic memory stick. And here's a better place than any to address some blatant misinformation floating around about this event in particular. People seem to get it in their heads that it was Andy who suggested hiding the body when it was actually Leyley, though she was just as fine leaving it where it was. There's also this further narrative that Leyley didn't know that locking the box would kill Nina, which is actually quite reasonable considering both how old she is and how she is. But people don't extend that same courtesy to Andy for some reason when he's only 2 years her senior. Sure, he is relatively smart, but you could still do well in school and not grasp the severity of things like asthma if you didn't have it, especially at 8 or 10 or however old they were during this time. Not to mention the unremorseful, borderline malicious tone this young Leyley exhibits in all facets. She takes a look at the dead body and basically tells the deceased girl to blame natural selection. Like, what the actual fuck? And the way that Andy hyper-focuses in on not getting caught can point in the other direction to what I'm trying to say, but I see it as he doesn't want to get caught because if he is, then no one will be there for Leyley. Even when he's older, mutilating and eating their neighbor's body for food was something he really didn't like doing. Even considering law, he was on the verge of throwing up from just a bite. All this portrays to me that Andy was a mostly regular child whose role as older brother was exploited to be Ashley's rock. And as her rock, he would eventually be embedded under the ground, under the weight of his sister who would never want to lean away. In the Lemon Muffin memory, he saw it was only him who could be that rock, and so he entwined their fates because he saw it as the best course of action to help his sister. This sense of duty is shown multiple times through his worrisome outbursts whenever Ashley puts herself into danger. Most older siblings have that sense of worry. Most older siblings also hear the phrase, "take care of your younger brother or sister" a million times. What most older siblings don't have is a narcissistic mother and a flake of a father acting as a complete failure of a support system to share that burden with. What most older siblings don't have is the struggle of acting as the only pillar for a sister like Leyley who struggles with relationships and emotions and morality. Such a thing was solely up to him. What he understood in this scene was that Ashley was only really happy when he was with her. What he was told was that he had to take care of his sister and help her with anything. Maybe part of him knew their parents didn't care and knew Leyley couldn't handle it like he could. So he made a choice that would keep them together again and again. Spend time with her on her birthdays, lock her in a box, choose her over his girlfriend, see not the evil she would commit, kill the guard, kill the neighbor, kill the hitman, kill their parents. He may end up anguishing over some choices more than others, but he always comes around because, well, this is what he should do, right? Ashley can't rely on anyone else, right? She only has him, right? In a cruel twist of fate, Ashley only acts like she has the right to monopolize Andrew because some part of Andrew believes she does have that right, because she's his poor little sister. She's the weird, unlikable little gremlin who needs him to swoop in and save her day, every time, no matter what. Is this enabling? You know what? Yes, 100% it is. But it's the combination of the end results, the outside factors, and the overall nuance of why Andrew enables Ashley that makes this relationship so amazingly tragic. Taking Leyley out to play is so ingrained in Andrew's head as the correct thing to do that it always seems to be the more logical option, and always ends up outweighing the other activities he undergoes to appear more normal than he is, thus ruining his mask and his relationships. Mrs. Graves says absence makes the heart grow fonder, yet was seemingly completely unable to perceive that the opposite does the exact same thing, even when the most prime example was presented right in front of her. At some point down the line, Andrew's fundamental function to keep Ashley happy probably began to cross some wires in his brain, and it's not like her actions, which were a result of the mentality behind this fundamental function he has, were helping any. In fact, it was those actions that filled the very same hole for love and affection he had as Ashley, the one he was just so much better at building around, ultimately helping and perpetuating this cycle. Ashley's uncomfortable amount of intimacy probably began to confuse him in a way he didn't like. There are too many of these to count, really. Faking some of his panic attacks to sleep next to her at night, the countless number of PDAs and possessive little quips, having the urge to pull a sulking Ashley in his arms to comfort her as one might a lover, which he then swiftly pushes away and describes as yet another one of those countless thoughts he wishes he never had. This affection even had an outlet in his girlfriend Julia, whom he used as a surrogate for Ashley because of their physical similarities reason because they're both, as he describes, the kind of person he can't take his eyes off out of worry, perhaps lending further credence to this hero complexy thing he exhibited in youth. And it's this look again. Just like with Ashley's tears, this look Andrew was given on 2 occasions now is a key part to his character. It's not annoyance or anger or indifference, it's remorse or an emotion adjacent to that. Whether he's sorry for manipulating Julia, sorry for not being able to love her properly, or maybe this is just him being bummed out that he's not with Ashley right now. I can't say for certain what this look means, and it's why I find Andrew so much more compelling to talk about than Ashley, and why I paint him in this light. Whereas Ashley may be tar black, Andrew is a spiral of all the shades of the abyss. His own dream sequence reveals he's completely fine with never seeing Julia again, and how that fact greatly bothers him. Is he emotionless? Can he not even regret how bitter they ended their relationship? Or is he just as horrible as he sees Ashley? By choosing Ashley again and again for what he saw as her benefit, has he outed himself as an unfeeling psychopath whose only release is his own sister? These thoughts get expedited by a pleading Renee Graves as her one final gambit, appealing to Andrew's inner child, the child that was so easy to her. But doing this begins to break down Andrew's worldview, because that inner child sees Andrew for what he is now. Andy may have been spineless and weak-willed and soft, but he still knew good from bad. And Andrew can either accept the happiness he finds in Ashley, or be so disgusted in himself for falling this far that their relationship strains more than it ever has in their 2 decades of attachment, giving us the burial and decay roots. Burial and decay, the linchpin of this game, but not because of the incest. Because the relationship between Ashley and Andrew is the crux of what makes this game so special, it is maybe redundant to explain that the choice that defines this relationship moving forward is the most interesting part of it all. If Ashley begins to trust Andrew, and Andrew begins to embrace his happiness being linked to his sister, you get the burial route. If Ashley is unable to trust Andrew, and Andrew begins to hate himself and by extension his sister for what he's become, you get the decay route. These routes offer very interesting parallels throughout the remainder of the game, giving us 2 extremely plausible outcomes depending on how you as the player perceive the ongoing trajectory of Andrew and Ashley's dynamic. One such parallel being how Andrew deals with their parents' corpses. In Burial, he takes them apart as if it were a business day. In Decay, he takes them apart as if it were a business day, a particularly bad business day. There, fix it. And Ashley's reaction to these versions of Andrew differ greatly. With Decay Andrew, she appears happy with his reaction. Unlike Andrew, Ashley never really grew up in any sense. Andrew always indulged her the same as if she were a child, so she holds their childhood dear, thus holding the spineless, indecisive Andy dear. She believes his reluctance is a sign of her Andy being present, ultimately thinking that this means he'll relent as he always does. True enough, her Andy is right there, but it's because it's Andy that remains that this reluctance is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of hatred, a hatred of what Andrew has become, and something that he blames Leyley, whom Ashley still embraces, wholly for. After failing to appeal to the Leyley he knew, Decay Andrew snaps. He doesn't play into Ashley's antics, he sharply insults her with borderline verbal abuse with no hint of playfulness, then he backs away, putting layers and layers between them. And at the very end, he stands up for himself. Quite violently, mind you, but he does it without being pushed to his absolute limit this time. Meanwhile, Ashley still tries to get a rise out of him, to see that familiar struggle she knows Andy for, to no avail. Whoever Andrew is now, it's nothing like she's ever seen or experienced, and that scares her. And in the vision we see, it's Andrew chasing her. When he inevitably catches her, he ends her life and promises to take his own, because he can no longer trust his sister to be the sweet little Leyley he always cared for. There's a constant romantic subtext to Andrew's rejection of Ashley, as if the love and devotion he's shown her all his life by simply choosing her over and over again gets brought out in full force in all of its twistedness in an attempt to show her how he truly feels. Decay Andrew can still only wield his hate through the love ingrained in him that's been so vilely perverted. In Burial, Andrew mutilates his parents' corpses with frightening nonchalance, almost reminiscent of Ashley. This leads it to question whether or not this is Andy or Andrew. To me, the answer is that this is Andrew. Andrew unconflicted with himself. Andrew fully embracing what makes him happy. Andrew who doesn't care about the distinction between himself and Andy because he knows what he feels to be Andy, the last remaining vestige of his reasonability, is long dead. This is the Andy that Andrew believes Leyley wants, in the form of Andrew himself, the killer, the giver, the do-it-all. In embracing his happiness, Andrew embraces the role he was given as Ashley's one and only. He takes part in Ashley's family recipe. He plays stupid games with her, and he worries that maybe this version of him is no fun for her like this, which goes against what he's been trying to do his whole life. He's even more open to displaying his affection, and this scares Ashley for a completely different reason. Because if Andrew is completely fine, then what use is she? Similarly to Decay, she attempts to rile up Andrew because he doesn't seem conflicted and wants to know that the Andrew that needs her is still in there. The vision in this route reveals many of Ashley's thoughts, her self-loathing, her idolization of Andrew, her indifference to her parents mirroring the indifference they had to her. She always felt as though Andrew was to be her bitch in a box, locked far, far away as shown by this moon. But depending on how their relationship developed, you can see different sections of her mind displayed by this puzzle. If you see the siblings developing an unhealthy love at a young age, thus destroying Andrew's capacity to feel connection with anyone else in the future, we can then understand that Ashley can learn to let Andrew out of that cage and let him act on his own, that maybe she doesn't need to constantly manipulate her brother to get the love she so desperately desires, that he was always there for her no matter what. Because Burial Andrew embraces his happiness and thus embraces Ashley as the only thing that matters to him, which leads to some complicated shit, but we'll leave that for the critique section. If you see Andrew as being able to connect with other people despite everything, we get a more ambiguous representation of Ashley's feelings, which in the end portrays something similar. She traps all the souls around this blackened one, assumedly Andrew, but she doesn't end up bottling him, instead letting him run alongside her in lieu of dragging him about. By the end, the two are essentially happier than they started, but when you consider who exactly these people are, yeah, this is definitely psychological horror. I can't believe I'm happy these two pieces of shit are smiling. If you were to ask me how I describe the differences for Andrew specifically, Decay Andrew is an Andy who has grown up, and Burial Andrew is an Andy that Andrew believes Leyley wants. Does that make any sense? In that regard, you could just say they're both Andrew. This is really falling apart as I'm writing it. And again, this is just my interpretation, and to be honest, I'd be open to more such interpretations in the comments because this is one of the more contentious parts of episode 2 as a whole. Well, apart from incest. There, I said the word, eat my fucking shoe. About time, really. I'd say I bought myself enough time. It took, 10 minutes to reference cannibalism? I gave it like 4 times that for the dreaded I word. For the love of God, I hope when I edit this, it's only been 40 minutes. When I say this psychological horror game is controversial, this is the reason why. I get it, I do. And if this scene was here solely for the sake of shock value or publicity like some claim it is, I'd probably be standing on the opposite side of this arbitrary line. But it isn't. Calling the Coffin of Andy and Leyley the incest game makes for a good title and thumbnail, and that's about it. Making it a genuine critique of the game is disingenuous at best and a complete fucking insult at worst. I mean, if you made it this far, at least give a damn fuck. And you can make the argument, why are you deeping a game with something like incest in it? It obviously means the creator is a massive weirdo. Well, first of all, saying that gets us into a whole different messy discussion entirely, and second, if we're unable to look at meaningful character-driven storytelling because of themes we're uncomfortable with, well, why don't we all just continue to live in our happy little bubbles? Which you're free to do, but someone's gotta tunnel the trenches, especially when there's discussion to be had, because it's only in attempting to understand in spite of these uncomfortable themes that we can gain a deeper understanding of the world and the people around us. Sort of like what Andrew and Ashley are doing throughout the entirety of the story. The gratuitous gore and horrific circumstances the game puts in front of our characters only exist through convenience of the story, with the ultimate goal of testing the bonds between Andrew and Ashley. The writing highlights this by making society seem dystopian and paradisic. Whether or not that's a good choice is up to you. I personally think it frames these two as being more realistic in the universe the game is set in because it's all just so fucking unbelievable. Calling the bank literally takes an entire night, shopkeepers cuss you out, the entire organ harvesting concept being masterminded by the psychosurgeon CEO of a water company. The game doesn't take itself too seriously. The only outlet in which it does is the character relationships. The incest, while perhaps not adding anything of significant value, throws in your face what you've been thinking this entire time. What the game's been trying to tell you the entire time. It is reiterating Ashley's desperation and lack of morality and Andrew's twisted hidden love. And it's not like it's even happened in the context of the plot yet. People argue day and night whether this vision is fabricated by the demon, failing to understand that that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Andrew has thought about it many times as yet another one of the thoughts he wishes he never had. Ashley has thought about it many times, thinking it a natural progression of their relationship as the only two on her little island. Whether or not it happens in the future, it is a completely realistic possibility for them, and the meaning behind that should be considered. If we choose Ashley's more tame response here, we basically get told simply what I've been trying to convey about them this entire time. Look, nobody in the context of the story is trying to say incest is a-okay, go fuck your sister. Ashley sees it as a means to an end. Andrew hates the fact that he even thinks about it. Mrs. Graves laments she's the worst mother ever for letting this come to be. You're too fucking right, you are. Them being happy at the end of Burial is arguably supposed to juxtapose this scene, trying to tell you that them being happy is a very, very bad thing. If Andrew accepts his place next to Ashley, thus lowering himself to her way of thinking, eventually this is probably what we'll get. It's just a little sad we see the smiling characters with a cute art style in the situation they're in and shove it under the shock value umbrella, without considering the very purposeful character dynamics we've been trying to establish from the very start. Is this the Madoka Magica effect? But it's not for everyone, and I'm not trying to make it seem as though it is. I just like people to understand that sometimes there is more than what the cover entails. The writing gets a lot of praise, I hear. With the sheer amount of it you go through, I'd hope so. Words like natural and realistic get thrown into the frame like bread and butter, but I don't really see that. In some aspects, sure, like the sibling bickering, but most of the time I found the writing more raw than real, where I feel like I'm intruding on things more often than not. Nobody really speaks like Ashley and Andrew, perhaps because nobody is truly like Ashley and Andrew, and it's for that reason I can't really attribute those words to the writing of these two. Everything they say to each other feels emotionally charged, like it's the first emotion they feel in response to the other taken vocabularic form, exhibited in the very quaint use of isms more native to this side of the Atlantic. The English Grave sounds like a very shitty drama on BBC Two. It's in that respect that the critique it reads more like a Wattpad fanfiction sort of makes sense to me. It is like a Wattpad fanfiction, just a little bit. Most of those sorts of stories are filled with such unfiltered emotions at times it's uncomfortable. Most of those stories have outlandish premises and circumstances for characters to face simply to see their reaction. From those two similarities alone, it might be possible to see what I'm getting at. There were countless times I thought to myself, there's no way a dude wrote this shit, because no dude actually thinks of using the Caledon as anything but the butt end of a gag, and no dude writes the chin tilt into lip brush true combo. That's just not a thing we do. But things like this don't suddenly detract from the sincere character study I've been trying to undergo this entire time, and if you think it does, maybe that's just a stigma you have from never reading really good Wattpad fanfiction. Unlike books, authors for fanfiction rarely have to go through the layers and layers of editorial staff and modification, all to satisfy stakeholder A and corporation B and company policy X, Y, whatever the fuck. It can then be argued that these sorts of stories are the truest expression of an author's artistic vision, and I think that's a real belief to stand on. If that's not your thing, hey, what can I do? I hope you find something that scratches your brain like this did me. I thought about this script at my barber at one point. It wasn't great trying to switch that mode off during small talk. Is the Coffin of Andy and Leyley a masterpiece like some people hail? I don't know. But what I can say for certain is that it's a work of art, a work of pure artistic expression, chocked to the brim with creator integrity and fully realized to the point of solidarity, which, in its own right, is kind of beautiful. Thank God this video is finally over. Bye-bye. They skip town to go off on yet another one of their adventures as Andy and Leyley. Fuck, my phone! I managed to talk a little bit more about how Ashley sees herself and how she sees seashells at the seashore. So for her own daughter to do some... So for her own...